Hiya! Welcome to LSB Feasters Radio Channel, where we keep great radio from the past alive. Today, we are going to Boston and the Dean of Talk Radio. I'm talking about Jerry Williams. Jerry spent most of his life on the radio doing talk radio, rabble-rousing, and just pretty much stirring the pot. Jerry came to Boston from WIBG in Philadelphia in the late 1950s to go to work at WMEX. He spent many years there until he got the call to go to Chicago. And he went to WBBM, where he did talk radio for a short period till the station flipped format to all news. He went back to Boston and then spent many years on WBZ. After he left WBZ, he had to deal with a non-compete, so he spent some time in Hartford and Philadelphia, but he came back to Boston and he spent many years on WRKO. Jerry was really good at what he did, and I'm telling you, he did not mind stirring things up one bit. If you haven't heard the Dean of Talk Radio, check him out. It's Jerry Williams on WBZ Boston.
The fishing ships are ready for the kill tomorrow. They'll race out of Moncton, New Brunswick to the strait between Prince Edward Island and the Canadian mainland to slaughter 50,000 baby seals. That's the limit allowed by the Canadian Department of Fisheries. Animal lovers in the United States and Canada are calling the slaughter barbaric. But it's money in the pockets of the men who make the kill. The skins of the young seals are highly prized because their coats are softer than those of older animals. 2 New York investment brokers and a Boston businessman gained additional control of the Boston Patriots franchise today, but immediately announced they do not plan to move the club. Patriots President Bill Sullivan said he has acquired an additional 4,200 shares of voting stock in the club, and that David McConnell and Robert Wettenhall have each purchased an additional 2,000 shares. Sullivan said the acquisition by the New York investment partners gives them 34% control of the club. Sullivan refused to disclose his own total share, but admitted he is now the largest single stockholder. The weather word for Boston and vicinity tonight: considerable high cloudiness, not so cold. Low temperatures in the 20s downtown, in the teens in the suburbs. West to northwest winds 10 to 15 miles an hour. Tomorrow mostly cloudy, but probably clearing in the afternoon, with high temperatures in the 30s. Northwest winds 10 to 15 miles an hour. The present temperature 30 degrees. The top story of the hour: an autopsy report shows that Patricia Walsh and Marianne Wysocki had been shot to death and slashed before being buried in their sand dune graves in Truro. And that's the 10 o'clock WBZ report with portions recorded. I'm Streeter Stewart.
254-5678.
Hello, America. Welcome. It's the 10 to midnight ride. In case you just joined us, we started a bit early tonight, not too long ago, about 10 minutes ago, in case you just tuned our way. Gary Ls Pierre, WBZ newsman, with us after a startling interview with John Fitzgerald. A price on his head, a most unusual and exclusive interview with a discussion surrounding the operation of the Mafia, the Syndicate, the Underworld. And with us tonight also is Donald Kahn, former Assistant Attorney General, Assistant District Attorney, also the attorney for John Fitzgerald. Went to law school with John Fitzgerald and F. Lee Bailey and that crowd at Boston. It was at Boston University time. And he's with us tonight, and we're going to continue this discussion about the Syndicate and the Underworld. I made the remark a bit earlier, not facetiously, but in candor, that some people will be saying, so what? I don't. What I meant to say is that they're not going to be saying, so what, about killing and about... They're going to be saying...
But they do, Jerry.
Oh, I understand that, but they're going to say, we know all of this. We know what John Fitzgerald told us. We know what you're telling us. We know what J. Edgar Hoover tells us. We know all of that. Now what? You know, what's the answer to all of this? It's too far gone.
It's not at all.
All right, well, give us some ideas.
All right, for example, it should crystallize and bring very vividly to the attention of the general public the need to have better law enforcement, better trained, better equipped, better implementation from legislation. We're in a situation, in a jurisdiction, Jerry, where you're asking law enforcement to fight, and it's a fight in a war, organized crime, with horse and buggy tools, where they're using 20th century modern technology to wage their war. We've got to fight it with no legislative implementation or backup. The tools are needed. The general public should be aware of the tools that are needed. The whole attitude of the general public should be, in my opinion, that without good law enforcement to fight organized crime, it's a spiraling thing, and this nation is going to get more and more caught up in a wave of violence and terror. And I think this is the greatest internal problem facing the United States of America.
I'm sure that most people would agree that it is a fantastic problem. But what they're about to say, I'm sure, before we get to questions and comments from at home, is that you know all the names. You heard Fitzgerald tonight naming names.
People don't know all the names.
Well, they know a good many of them.
They know
the
Raymond
so-called
Patriarca,
kingpins, right?
sure.
They know all of these names, and I'm sure the law enforcement officials know all the names.
Yeah, they do, but the general public doesn't, Jerry. We can, for example, as we recently did in the last major prosecution we had under the Richards administration, indict some very, 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 in our opinion, bad people without a ripple, really, in the Boston press, because there is no public identification. Another thing that they do, they use people as front people, especially in the area of legitimate business, who ostensibly would pass as the clean-cut, rising young business executive with no record. A person that you might deal with in a legitimate business fashion, having no idea that he's a front man for the Cosa Nostra.
Well, how can anything be done about something like that? The money is filtered, let's say, through Swiss banks. I've been reading about that. Money goes through Swiss banks, controlled perhaps by the same people, comes back through so-called legitimate sources. All of a sudden a business opens. You think it is operated by the syndicate, and boom, the finger is pointed at some nice young guy who has no connection with them altogether, and you're involved. Now, how can you get to something like that?
You can get to it.
How's
if
that?
you cut off their sources of illegal revenue, which give them so much money to plow into legitimate businesses.
Now, how do you cut that
You're
off?
going to, well, you do it by putting the pressure on. You do it basically by going after them not at the street level bookie level, which is their major source of revenue, but you do it by going after them at a higher strata, going after them and hurting them at the command level, because it's been our experience, when you knock them out at the command level, the people below are not as intelligent, articulate, or bright, and they will resort to classic criminal conduct in the open.
And
That's when they get nailed. And that's the way to attack them. Get them at the command level in their illegal activities, and you're going to choke off their sources of revenue and their ability to pump this dough into legitimate business and affect every single individual
Well,
in
this
this
has been
country.
going on since the Volstead Act, since Prohibition. The Prohibition created the syndicate. And since that time, it's 40 years now. Why hasn't somebody done what you've said? There have been people who have done that. I've read about Elliot Ness, and we see those crime-busting fighters on television. So why hasn't it been done? Is it because public officials are in the bag as well?
Now, this is constantly said and constantly asked, is it because the Cosa Nostra has their man in the courts, their man in law enforcement, their man in the legislature, etc.?
We suggested that on tonight's
I
show.
say not necessarily so at all. The reason is because there's never been any sustained effort by law enforcement, because law enforcement has never had the proper backup or motivation to go after them. That's why this effort of the Richardson administration, a statewide organized crime section of specialists, was so critical. Because it was the first of its kind to do exactly what you suggest, not just create a little brush fire and then have it die and maybe 5 years later go after them again, but stay after them on a sustained statewide basis or even regional basis, New England basis, with a degree of permanency that will transcend politicians, administrations, individuals, prosecutors, etc.
Is this an American thing?
Yes, it is.
All American?
Well, what do you mean, the Cosa Nostra?
Yes.
Well, of course, its basic inception was in Italy.
Is it now simply an American thing?
Yes, it is, in
Meaning,
my
I know there are
opinion.
people probably involved with Swiss banks. I've been reading about that. But does it reach out into Europe? Is it in Asia?
Yes, it does reach out into Europe. It reaches into South America. It reaches into the Caribbean. It reaches across the continent. There's no question about it. But the family in the United States answers to no one. They are a power unto themselves.
Why doesn't it reach into a country like Ireland?
It's an interesting question. I think one of the prime reasons it probably does not is because the feeling is that the Irish economy is not sufficiently attractive to warrant it.
Well, it could be because the people can go bet legally there. You know, I can walk in. I've walked in myself, as a matter of fact, bet on football games and on...
How would you account, if that was your rationale, to the tremendous control and infiltration in Las Vegas?
I really don't know.
My opinion, there is no correlation to be whether you have legalized gaming and whether or not you will have the syndicate. The syndicate will use illegal gaming as a prime source of revenue. But if you take it away from them and legalize gaming, people seem to think this is automatically going to eradicate the syndicate. This is not so at all. There's no correlation.
Now,
They'll
this
turn to something
discussion
else.
of legalized gaming in Massachusetts right now, don't you agree that for the benefit of those who would favor legalized gambling, that there would still be that element operating on the fringe?
Yeah, and then there's another thing that disturbs me about this current discussion, too, Gary, is that, you know, we have so many other problems about the activities that are going on. Why waste time and effort in discussing, studying, and putting money into legalizing gaming? Why not put the money into law enforcement to fight illegality, whether it be gaming, loan sharking, narcotics, because they're very big now in narcotics again, for example.
I'm going to break for just a moment. Former Assistant AG Donald Kahn, the present attorney for John Fitzgerald with us, WBZ newsman Gary Ls Pierre. And if you're looking for the best washer for the money, compare, and you'll buy a Westinghouse Laundromat Tumble Action Washer. Compare the way it gets clothes clean. Your wash is lifted, tumbled, and plunged through the water 57 times a minute, then through one spray rinse and 2 deep rinses to remove all the suds and soil for really thorough cleaning action. Yet, it's safe and gentle for your sheerest fabrics. Compare. Can you wash every 3rd load free? Well, most housewives overestimate the size of their wash loads, taking 3 loads to wash what could be done in 2 loads. So Westinghouse gives you the exclusive way to save door that ends guesswork. It tells you the size of your wash, helps you get a better wash, saves hot water, bleach, and detergents, and lets you launder enough clothes each time to eliminate every 3rd load. So compare. You'll buy a Westinghouse Laundromat Tumble Action Washer. You can be sure if it's Westinghouse. Now let's return to Donald Kahn and Gary Ls Pierre. Gary, what's happening with the present Attorney General, the new Attorney General? Richardson has gone to Washington, and Bob Quinn is now the new Attorney General. Are they going to continue this division, this crime-busting division?
Well, first of all, I'd like to refer back to something that Donald just suggested. He suggested that we shouldn't be bothering with the studies of legalized gambling, and that's precisely what our Attorney General is doing right now. So I'm sure that Don is trying to indicate he doesn't think that's a good idea. If I'm interpreting you wrong, correct me.
Positively, I don't think. Not in the current posture with all of the problems we have and all of the problems of law enforcement and trying to cope with the violence and crime and the escalating crime rate. We need a study of legalized gaming like we need a hole in the head at this particular juncture and point in time.
Well, this is another situation, Jerry, that I think where public, I don't know if it's apathy or if it's ignorance is a better word, of what exactly is going on, whether it be the Cosa Nostra or whether it be the Attorney General's office. I don't think anyone realizes how effective this unit that Elliot Richardson set up was under the leadership of Donald Kahn and Charles Rogovan, who was about, by the way, to get a big job with the federal government in organized crime. He came from there to here and is now going back. But I think Donald Kahn would perhaps be more capable than I to assess whether or not this particular unit set up by Elliot Richardson could be maintained under the Attorney General. Right now, in my opinion, you asked me, the Attorney General's office is in a state of turmoil, to say the least. There's a transition period going on up there that, and on the surface, does not seem terribly smooth at all. There may be reasons for it that I don't know about, but I am certain of the fact that it's not very smooth up there at the moment. And Donald Kahn, maybe you know more about whether or not he intends to maintain this organized crime division and just how enthusiastic he has been about it.
Gary, I've had no conversation.
What are your rumblings?
I have had no conversation directly with Mr. Quinn about the retention of the outfit. I was delighted to see, for example, however, that he selected a very experienced prosecutor. It was announced in the paper today, a former fellow assistant DA with me in Middlesex County by the name of Aaron Bykowski, to prosecute one of the gangland killings that we made. The indictments were made by the Organized Crime Section.
Well, then maybe he is going to move in that.
I would think that this is a firm indication that Mr. Quinn recognizes the importance of the effort. I would hope that the effort would be continued. You know, I would be positively discouraged and disheartened if we spent 2 years laboring in the vineyards, if you will, and to see it all go down the chute, and I don't think he will let it go down the chute. I think that Mr. Quinn is in a new job. He's come from something that is completely different, the Speakership of the House, to the tremendous complexities of the Department of the Attorney General. I think that...
You think of the job that he had that he's ready for?
That's kind of put me on the spot, Gary. I don't know the man that well. All I can say is that he has not had, obviously, the law enforcement training and experience, and I would only hope that he would get the people who have to help him, like a Baikovsky, because this is so critical. If this job of ours is not continued, it'll all go for naught, and I would certainly hope that Mr. Quinn would continue it.
Do you think that and let's say he does maintain this anti-crime division, and let's say that he is as forceful as you feel that Mr. Richardson was, specifically what can be done in Massachusetts? Let's be as specific as we can without generalizing, but let's go after these guys and the big guys and this level and that level. What can we do about numbers, bookmaking? All of this is you said the main source of revenue, right?
I'll be very specific.
Somebody else told me that the business of betting on baseball and football and basketball is really where the heavy money is. And that goes on every day of every week of every year. Hockey, all of this brings in all kinds of money to the underworld. Listen, I know people like to do that. That's what I'm saying. They like to do it, and they don't care if it's illegal. So how can you bust something up where what everybody likes? I've seen the most legitimate people say, get on the phone, call my bookie.
I think that everybody does like to gamble. It's human nature to want to wager on some sporting event, etc. But if we do this, and this is what we were proposing at about the time the transition in administration occurred, Jerry, if we go after them at the heavy wire service centers, the layoff centers, where they operate, and it's the core and the central organizational point of the whole illegal gaming apparatus in this jurisdiction, we can almost put them out of business. In my opinion, if we knocked out the wire services and we knocked out the layoff parlors and their ability to lay off the heavy money, for example, this tremendous influx of money on Joe Namath and his Jets that they're going to upset the Baltimore Colts. They were the sentimental favorite of the nation. The average little street bookie can't take the action. He lays it off. If he hasn't got that ability to lay off, we're going to hurt them. If he hasn't got the ability to get information through wire services and it's cut off, we're going to hurt them. We'll never eradicate gaming, but if we can reduce it to the point that it's disorganized rather than organized, so that it's a little street-level bookie operating who is not part of the Cosa Nostra, because that's what the public doesn't understand. The friendly corner book is a part of the Cosa Nostra.
Well, then how can the friendly corner good guy who wants to make a bet, though, do that legally?
Let's put the cart before the horse.
You see, some people say, I've heard this said by former attorney generals, by the way, that the bookie is just a public servant. He only exists because there's some other guy who wants to make the bet, and he doesn't care where it goes.
But let's if we can also educate the public that 90 cents of every dollar they bet goes into the coffers of the Cosa Nostra and is used to finance the nefarious, such as loan sharking, is used now in the illegal narcotics area, so their teenage kid might become hooked.
You know people know that, don't you?
I don't think they really do know it. I don't think up until recent memory, Jerry, they've really got the message that the corner bookie lays off and answers to a man who's given the territory by the syndicate. But they're starting to know it, and I think if they do know it, we might cut the flow of money off, and if we hit them high and low by this basis, education and going after the wire services and layoffs, will hurt them so that we will put booking where it belongs as a disorganized, ill-conceived, little hit-or-miss proposition in our city and towns.
What does the good old gaming and sporting crowd in America do? That's what I'm saying. You see, they create this business, and the creation of the syndicate is is the second tentacle. The fellow who really creates it is the guy with the American with the money who wants to play.
There's no question he's always going to want to play.
Right,
But
that's
if he's
what I mean. What do you do for that guy?
If he's a good guy, Jerry, and he does not want to see this cancerous thing develop and flourish and corrupt his kids and your kids and my kids.
I don't think anybody wants that.
Then if we can tell him not to make that bet with that bookmaker, but in the alternative to go to the track, to go where it is legitimate to bet, or perhaps at the appropriate time to look into areas to have some legitimate way to bet on sporting events that is illegal, you're going to eliminate the syndicate. And then the man won't place that money that helps the syndicate to grow and grow and grow.
I agree, Jerry, that it's got to hit an awful lot closer to home than that, because in my interview with the former Attorney General Elliot Richardson in that show that you just heard, I said to him in the conversation that friends of mine, relatives of mine, have every day of the week throw 50 cents into the numbers pool. A fella comes in the store, he throws him $50, okay? Once in a while he hits it for 500, he hits it for $1,000. Now if I go to him and say, do you know where that 50 cents is going? Do you know that 50 cents is going to organized crime? He says, yeah, whoopee. You know, I'm impressed. It means zero to him. And at the end of my program, I said, organized crime cannot operate without the help of the people. And I'm afraid, Don, I'll have to say, it's an uphill battle, because educating the people, they do know this. They are beginning to know that this money, where it goes. But stopping it is another thing. You know, the local chaplain is throwing his 50 cents into the numbers pool every day. Seeming, what's a 50-cent piece going to do, for heaven's sakes? Those 50-cent pieces add up, as you know, to $300 million a year in the city of Boston.
You know the only cases that I was ever personally threatened as a public prosecutor? Gaming cases. If anybody ever doubted the mafia and gaming connections, they should watch the course and conduct of gaming prosecutions. When the fines are paid on the spot, thousands of dollars in fines by the biggest rolls of cash you ever saw,
and it hurts.
By the guys in the silk suits with the alligator shoes and the big fedoras. And this is incredible that the public isn't aware of it, and all I would ask them to do is think of this. When there's a propensity to make that 50-cent bet or that $2 bet, think in terms of the junior high school kids in this Commonwealth who are now becoming addicted because of the tremendous influx of illegal narcotics into this jurisdiction, which is now directly traceable, again like it was in the 50s, to the syndicate.
Another example I outlined in the show, take the kid that breaks into your house. House breaking, you know, I live in the community of Reading. House breaks all the time in Reading, not just Reading, every suburban community as well as the urban areas. Take the kid that breaks into your house, steals a television set, steals anything. To get money, to give right back to the hoods, to pay for the habit started in the first place,
right,
by organized crime, by the importation, distribution.
And where does he take his television set?
You try to tell the housewife, Don, you try to tell a housewife or a local businessman, you know, and they're not impressed. And this is the problem, apathy. They're not impressed by these figures. You say, well, what about your kid getting hung up on dope because of your 50-cent bet? They don't buy it.
Well, since there's so much money already involved, you know, past, and I'm not talking about present or future, so much money involved, all that loot over there in those banks again, and all of it going back into so-called legitimate businesses. Isn't it beyond any hope?
No.
Have the tentacles reached out so that even the legitimate businesses bring in so many earnings? It's almost like an underworld conglomerate.
No, it isn't without hope, because let's take, for example, and trace their activities in legitimate business industries. They get into legitimate businesses and they still use their illegal means to further their legitimate businesses, so that they are still performing their illegal conduct, the threats, the intimidation, the fear. If we can convince the public that law enforcement is sufficiently capable and sufficiently trustworthy to break down this fear, this wall of silence that follows the underworld, whether they're illegal or legitimate, we're going to make it, Jerry.
I think it was back in the days when Richardson Dilworth, Philadelphia, was a prosecutor and district attorney. He very clearly made a statement, I remember reading it in the now defunct Saturday Evening Post, that the only way they, quote unquote, can exist is because public officials are paid off. That's the only way.
Now, this is too glib. This is too quick to dismiss it. It's much more complicated than that. I have heard this since I've been a law enforcement officer, that how can you advocate increasing the respect of the law enforcement officer when so many of them must be on the take? I say not so. I say that there are no more bad law enforcement officers than there are bankers, than there are lawyers, than there are any other profession or vocation you want to name. The problem is not the law enforcement officer who's on the take. The problem is that the problems are so vast, he feels that what can he do? He goes and pinches a bookie, he takes him to court, and he feels that his chances are good that he might lose the case on a technicality, or in the alternative, that the bookie will be fined and money is nothing to them. It's discouragement, more, in my opinion, than it is active participation in the take, so
I'm going to break again for a moment. The former Attorney General Donald Kahn is with us. He's the attorney for John Fitzgerald. Gary Ls Pierre, WBZ newsman, who conducted these startling interviews with John Fitzgerald. Tonight, if you missed it, it was on from about 9:05 until about 10 tonight, and we're going to be taking calls any moment at 254-5678 and let you in on the conversation. And if you have anything you'd like to comment upon that you already heard, or a curious question you might have, WBZ and WBZ FM, Group W Westinghouse Broadcasting in Boston. This is Jerry Williams on the 10 to Midnight Ride. Larry Glick won't be here tonight. Bill Garcia will be filling in. He will or he won't. He will be here. He won't be here. He's still ill. He is ill, in case people didn't know that. Bill Garcia will be filling in for him. Let's take some telephone calls now for Donald Kahn, Gary Ls Pierre, at 254-5678. Let's begin telephone call number 1. Hello?
Yes?
You're on the air.
Hello, Mr. Ls Pierre?
Yes, sir.
I was wondering, before during your program, you talked about betting and the amount of money that is annually waged in the city of Boston. Well, here is my question. I was wondering, does the money that is bet at the horse race through the pari-mutuel window end up in the hands of the mafia? Now, the reason I ask this question, this is legalized betting.
In a one-word answer, no.
No?
No.
It doesn't, huh?
Perhaps Donald Kahn can expound on that, because I don't profess to be an expert on gambling in Massachusetts, but Don, do you want to add to that?
No, when it goes through a legitimate track,
Right.
and it's bet at a track, it does not go anywhere near.
It's the bookie. It's the middleman.
It's the bookie who performs the off-track service of taking your bet so that you don't have to go to the track and place it. That bookie, in turn for having the privilege to have a particular territory, passes on a very high percentage of his take to the next strata and ultimately into the coffers of the Cosa Nostra.
Right. And I was just wondering also, just a short question, would the legalization of drugs hurt the mafia?
Don?
I think the legalization of drugs might hurt society, sir. I don't know about the
What does
mafia.
legalization mean? Now, we don't know what you mean by legalization. You don't want people to go up and say, hey, man, let's have my shot today.
If it was government-controlled, like I think the mafia runs a lot of these organizations and sell to high schools, you know, and pushes along this area. And I was just wondering if this was legalized by our laws, would this hurt the mafia in any way?
You mean under government regulation, whereby addicts wouldn't have to go to the underground for it and could be, under prescription, obtain a supply of drugs that would be necessary for their good health. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
The mafia doesn't like to exist that they have anything to do with drugs. They don't like to admit, rather.
Oh, they won't. They'll tell you that they're positively not in the business.
Oh, they're not in that business.
Oh, no. They haven't been in the business since 55 or 6, they'll tell you.
In fact, the new concoctions of drugs have put a dent in their market.
Yes, they have, because, of course, there are other sources that the kids manufacturing their own, which has hurt them.
Pills, too.
Yeah, right,
and
right.
it's cheap to buy
Right.
pills.
You don't have to go to heroin.
You know, it's a very difficult question for me to answer with the legalization like I think England went through
Now,
this.
I think it's regulation. Legalization is a bad term.
Regularization of the addict, etc., I think would not necessarily hurt the mafia. No, not necessarily.
Okay, sir, thank you for calling. 254-5678 is our number for Donald Kahn and Gary Ls Pierre. Hello?
Hello.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes?
Are we on the air?
If we're not, there's something wrong. We've got a lot of dead air otherwise, sir.
Is this Mr. Kahn?
Mr. Kahn is here.
Mr. Kahn.
Yes, sir.
I had some experience during the war with dealing with some of these characters, and I'm quite aware that all of the law enforcement people in city, state, and federal government know who they are.
Yes, sir.
There's absolutely no question about that, and they know about their activities.
Yes, sir.
Now, the number one problem, as I faced it when I was dealing with this situation during the war, was getting them convicted.
Absolutely.
There's no question about that. Now, we all know who they are and what their activities are. Now, number one, I think the harassment idea is excellent because you've heard the expression, the heat's on, drives the boys out of town, and so on and so forth. And I know it takes a lot of people to continue the harassment program. But I think as far as immunity is concerned, this is where we should push, as proved by Barboza and so on, that we should get an immunity program pushed through the legislature.
No question, sir. That's
and now
the core.
This is the key to the whole thing, because I know what your problem is. You know who they are, and you know what their activities are. You know all the names. You have a file on them. But proving something is quite a bit different.
We have a system in this country, sir, that protects all people, whether they be people who are desirous of living by breaking the law, or people who become occasionally involved with law enforcement through no fault of their own.
That's right.
And we cannot break constitutional rights and guarantees merely because a man is a bad man and a part of the syndicate. We have to prosecute them in the American manner with a fair trial. But
that is right.
You have hit upon the essence of any effective organized crime control, and that is an immunity statute, a witness immunity bill, which would enable a public prosecutor to take these recalcitrant witnesses before a judge, have immunity granted, and then Mr. Witness would have to testify, or in the alternative, go to jail. He could no longer claim the right against self-incrimination because there would be nothing to incriminate himself about in the testimony.
Right.
Don, such a statute has proven itself. Why can't we get it here?
Now, may I ask one more question?
Yes, sir.
We've talked on this program about people doing something about things and so on, and really we've talked about it I've been listening for about a half hour about the people should do something about it and so on and so forth. What I say is, if an immunity law is necessary, why doesn't the legislature do something about it? Now, you say the people, sure, if the legislature doesn't do something about it, we vote those guys out. But, you know, we have a lot of problems with Beacon Hill. What can we do to get the legislature to vote this immunity law?
Well, I think we can do basically what we have been doing with the rest of our law enforcement legislative programs, sir. Urge the public to contact their representatives and senators by letter, by telephone, and urge the passage of this kind of legislation.
And we appreciate your call, too, sir. Thank you very much. It's 23 minutes before 11 on WBZ Radio with Gary Ls Pierre and Donald Karn. Hello? Hello?
Hello,
You're
Jeff.
on the air, yes?
Yes, Jerry.
Yes.
First, I'd like to say hello to Mr. Klon. It's wonderful that we have a special guest as he, as well as John Fitzgerald. That's the reason why I'm calling tonight. I was really amazed after listening to him. He really is a man with a great amount of courage. And, Jerry, I should be ashamed to even say this, but I, for one, have always played a number or two, you know?
What numbers? Oh, forget it. Don't tell us now.
No, I intend to forget it. After listening to John Fitzgerald and Mr. Korn, I mean, I'm really ashamed. You never realize how important, how these people are making money on just average housewives.
Don?
This is what we've been trying to tell everybody, ma'am, for these many years. This is what we've been trying to convince the general public, and I'm positively delighted at your reaction. If there were a number of people, they talk about the tax revolt in this Commonwealth,
right,
and the taxpayers' revolt. If we could have a gamblers' revolt where the average citizen would not place that 50-cent number play a day,
right,
would not go and place that $2 bet on the ponies or the horses, we'd be making progress, and we'd really put a dent in them.
Jerry said a little earlier, a lot of people may throw up their hands and say, "You're not telling me anything." Jerry, I feel as though that show is a success because one lady called up and said she's ashamed of herself.
There you are.
Yes, I am. And not
God
only
bless
that,
you.
Mr. Korn, I really,
Listen, you want to buy an Irish sweepstake ticket?
no, I'm not interested
No, listen, the
anymore.
boat just landed.
Jerry, listen, I have two teenagers here, and I never realized that that narcotics is stemming from all these 10 and 15 and half a dollar plays. And another thing, why do the legislature blame the people? Why don't they make a law to stop all that?
Well, ma'am, if they would just pass some of this law enforcement legislation, such as the previous caller alluded to, the witness immunity bill,
right,
we'd be well on our way moving into phase 2 of this war, and perhaps we'd win it. And if we win, you're going to win, ma'am.
Yes, and I think I really couldn't get over. I had tears in my eyes when I heard John Fitzgerald speak tonight, to come right out in the open and to tell the people the plain facts. And how can an average father and husband walk into a cafe and place bets tomorrow?
Let's hope he can't, ma'am.
I hope.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your interest, too. Bye-bye. 20 minutes to 11 on WBZ, the spirit of 103. Former Assistant Attorney General Donald Kahn is with us, and Gary Ls Pierre. Hello.
Yes.
You're on the air.
All right, thank you.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, could you please let us know the names of business operations that are run by the Mafia so people won't go there? I'm speaking in particular of the entertainment areas.
This is very difficult, ma'am. We have laws for slander and libel in this jurisdiction, and this particular broadcasting station obviously is governed by those laws, by like everybody else. We would suggest this, that we know who they are. We know what legitimate businesses they are operating. All we can do is continue to go after the people who are operating the businesses so they won't have more money to invest to buy another business. And we wish we could tell you, but our law does not operate that way in this system, where we can tell you, don't patronize restaurant X, don't go to cleansing establishment Y. We can't tell you this because the law is there to protect everybody, ma'am, the good and the bad, as I indicated.
If I can throw in one more thing, people think that it's all in the big city and operating in the dark alleys of Boston and Chicago and Los Angeles and whatnot. Boy, you think your quiet little suburban community is quiet, huh? Well, you take a good close look at some of these and get close to law enforcement and learn what some of these establishments are right out in your quiet, lily-white little suburban community. Organized crime money operating tiny little corner store businesses, nice restaurants.
I know it, right. This is the thing. I hear a lot of the nightclub entertainment places are run by the Mafia, but, you don't know if this is just talk or if it is just so.
Well, ma'am, it is so. They are very big in the entertainment business. They have been very big in it for many, many years. But I would suggest to you, rather than think in terms of boycotting a restaurant or a nightclub or any business establishment operated by them, think in terms of doing something positive by looking at your local law enforcement officer and what are his problems.
Right. Well, I have another suggestion.
Yes, ma'am.
Could possibly a list of the voting record of our legislatures be published in the papers just before the election?
It has been done, ma'am, and you can get a record of your legislators' voting record anytime you want it.
Yes, right, but I mean, if it was put in the papers just before election, this might be brought out to the public.
Well, I think I should say one thing here in defense of legislators. We suggested this during the program as to whether or not organized crime controls the way legislators vote on Beacon Hill. To be sure that if they thought that they could influence a legislator, they would make that effort. But just because a man voted against, for instance, a witness immunity bill, taking that as an example, that doesn't mean by any stretch of the imagination that he's being controlled by some two-bit hood someplace. I don't think it would be a fair analysis to look at his record and say, well, you voted against witness immunity, you must be a hood. That's not the case, and I don't think it would really be fair. But you can get your particular legislator's voting record anytime you want.
And we appreciate your interest. Thank you very much, too. 254-5678 is the number on WBZ, the area code 617. We'll return with Gary Ls Pierre and Donald Kahn in a moment. Just shuffle on over to Bell Oldsmobile. If you had been in a Tornado during this storm, you would have glided over 3-foot drifts because it is front-wheel drive. I saw a Tornado go right over a drift. I mean that. Front-wheel drive. Of course, there was no driver in it. It was just the driver going. No, really. Actually, Bell Oldsmobile would be delighted to see you. And it is ridiculous for you to spend another $200, $300, maybe $400 on bad transmissions. And it's time to trade at Bell Oldsmobile, New England's largest Oldsmobile dealer at the Bell Circle Revere. They're delighted to see you. Watch out, we're going to give you the best bank financing you can get. Check it out. Make comparisons. Bella's been at that location for years and years and years, and they'd like you to check with any other Oldsmobile dealer, any deal you got. Oh, yes, make sure you stop in and see the service department. It's a very important factor because you can buy a car anywhere. When you got to come back a couple of months later for service, you want to know you're getting the best service on your warranty that you can get. And Bella's been doing that for years, too. Reputation, stability, the best in financing, all of it adds up to the best deal on a Bell Oldsmobile, where they give you the shirts right off their backs. The Big Bell, 500 Beach Street at the Bell Circle, Revere. Now it's 10:45 with Donald Kahn and Gary Ls Pierre and their follow-up to A Price on His Head. An exclusive interview with John Fitzgerald, former attorney for the Mafia, and Gary Ls Pierre. With us tonight, Donald Kahn, who was a former Assistant Attorney General and an Assistant DA, also is the attorney for John Fitzgerald. Let's continue. Hello.
Hello.
Yes, you're on the air, sir.
I'd like to make a couple of comments, if I might, about Mr. Kahn's approach to this whole problem of trying to put a stop to the Mafia operations, if I might. I honestly don't think he's being too terribly realistic in this whole approach. It almost sounds to me in the last hour and a half that all he's really doing is getting us involved in an arms race of sorts with the Mafia. It doesn't seem consistent at all that the state allows legalized gambling at racetracks. It doesn't allow legalized middlemen, so to speak. We all know in the city of Boston that prostitution is to be had and gambling is to be had. And I don't understand his statement whatsoever when he made the statement that there's no correlation between legalized gambling and putting the Mafia out of business in this field specifically.
Well, I think you misconstrued what I said, number one, sir. I indicated that by legalizing gaming per se, you are not going to put the Cosa Nostra out of business. That if you legalize gaming and you buy the theory that the controls were sufficiently great and clear-cut to keep the Mafia out of the state-run organization, then you would hurt them financially, there is no question, because the vast percentage of their revenues come from illegal gaming operations. But you're not going to put them out of business, sir, by legalizing gaming in this or any other jurisdiction, and I would call your attention to the state of Nevada as a prime example. They legalized it there, and they've got more hoods per square inch in that jurisdiction than any other state in the nation.
Well, isn't the state of Nevada? You're making that a specific example. Isn't the state of Nevada then not a question of? Isn't that a question then of mechanics rather than anything else? That the state of Nevada has let the hoods in, so to speak. And that's a mechanical question. If we go out of our way and put a little more effort into the mechanics of this sort of thing, then we can keep them out.
I don't necessarily think that follows at all. Now, we have a state which is legalized where it attracts a tremendous amount of tourists into the jurisdiction because of the gaming parlors and the casinos, etc., and yet the Cosa Nostra is flourishing. It's certainly not flourishing within the state revenue departments which gain the revenue from the legalized gaming. It's flourishing as an ancillary thing, and it's flourishing in a big way. Now, the controls built into legalizing gaming have not in any way, shape, or form dampened the activity of the syndicate in that jurisdiction.
Well, again, I'm not qualified to discuss that with you, but the basic thing I'd like to point out is I just don't feel that we're being realistic in our approach to this, that all we're doing is we're taking some short-term views of this.
Could I interrupt you for one moment?
Sure.
You know, one thing you said disturbed me a little bit. You said you thought that I was advocating engaging in an arms race with the Cosa Nostra. I would tell you, and I've been in the business a few years, that I'm not being facetious or kidding when I say, sir, that it is a war. It is a war that's being fought every day and every night in the streets of every major city in this country. And it's not an arms race that I purport to advocate. It is give law enforcement the proper legislative implementation to fight them as they are fighting us with modern, up-to-date tools, equipment, and trained personnel. I don't want to run around and arm every single law enforcement officer with a bazooka so he can blast the local bookie. I want to arm him with the ability to legally and within the regard for everybody's constitutional rights get to the core of the problem and convict the people who are strangling our society, the syndicate.
Well, this is the one point I disagree with you. Maybe you misconstrued me. I didn't mean to infer that I thought every policeman should have a bazooka. What I meant to say was, every time we pass a law in a legitimate society, in a democratic society, the Cosa Nostra is going to find it that much easier to circumvent that law because they're operating around it.
No, this is not quite accurate. We took and looked at our entire system of criminal justice in this state, and we saw certain loopholes, abilities that people had who make their living breaking the law of circumventing our law, and these proposed legislative changes are to close those loopholes, not to violate anybody's constitutional rights in a democracy, but to close the loopholes so that the people who make their living breaking our law, when they break it, are going to get caught and convicted, sir. And these are exactly what the name implies, countermeasures by law enforcement to close loopholes and bring us up to modern, sophisticated criminal methods.
Well, then let me ask you one last question. If and when theoretically the loopholes can be closed, would they in fact stop the Cosa Nostra entirely, or would they in fact just settle the Cosa Nostra and legalize society, so to speak, into a status quo where they can live with each other? This is where I disagree with you, because that's all I feel it's going to happen. That we're not ever going to stop them this way. All we're ever going to do is disorganize them, as you had said previously, and they're still going to be around. Whereas if we take I would think at least if we take a more flexible approach and compete with them in a number of ways, I myself don't.
Peaceful coexistence with the Cosa Nostra, sir?
No, I don't think that's what it means, Don. I think what he means is competing by the Irish way. That is by opening betting parlors and turf accounts. They call them turf accounts.
Exactly. I don't feel...
Where you can bet on a football game and a soccer game and something like that and take that revenue away from them.
It's just not that simple, because you have to know their other areas and the way they operate. You have to know, for example, the background of their loan sharking activities, which is the most vicious racket I've ever seen, where they prey on the little guy who can't get a legitimate loan. This is where you can never coexist with them or legalize an area so that you're in competition with them until you developed a system of credit in this country where the little guy who had no security and no credit references could get a legitimate loan. Now, I am a firm believer if you made money available to the little guy making $80 a week so that he could get a legitimate loan, that you'd hurt the loan shark badly, sir, and that would be a constructive way to take a positive legal approach to giving something to the little guy so he doesn't have to go to the syndicate for the service that he can't get through legitimate means. I'd buy that 100%.
I think you indicated earlier already that legalizing such things as the $2 bet parlor where you could go and bet on a football game or basketball or whatever, that would not stop.
Of course not.
Organized crime.
No, I'm not saying it would stop organized crime. I just think...
I'm not terribly sure how much it would hurt them.
I just think, if I might say one thing, that I think it's time that we stop chipping away at them and really take the initiative away from them and let them work at it for a while. It seems to me that we're doing all the working at this, and it's time for them to start struggling a little bit and let them come after us for a while. This seems silly that we're talking about apathy, and you had a woman call, and you've had one call tonight about one woman who's promised that she's not going to bet on the pool anymore. Well, if we go on every night, and if you gentlemen do a good job every single night, and you get one call a night, it's going to take an infinitely long period of time for you to stop the Cosa Nostra.
I would defer to Jerry on that. I would bet if you get one call of that nature, that means there's a lot of people out there with the same sentiments.
I would indicate, that it does mean, 1,000 other people probably who might be saying, I'm not going to do that anymore, but they may forget the day after. I'm not sure of that.
No, we don't
I'm not
know.
sure whether they're going to come back or not. But, sir, you raise an interesting point, and we appreciate it, and thank you very much. 7 minutes before 11 with Donald Kahn, Gary Ls Pierre on WBZ Radio as we continue at 254-5678. Hello? You're on the air. Hello? Hello?
Jerry.
Yes.
Jerry, I realize I'm on the air, but the gentleman who was just on prior to me generally covered my discussion, so I'm going to relinquish my time to some more diverse opinions.
Okay, thank you very much. 254-5678. Let's continue with the next call. Hello?
Jerry?
Yes.
I was wondering if that gentleman that's on the show could explain to me why those mafia members, when they landed in Florida, were served with subpoenas, and why they weren't incarcerated or taken away or something.
You're referring to the recent meeting of the national family which occurred in Florida, ma'am?
Right.
And was covered by all your major wire services?
Going on this week, isn't it?
Yes, it is. The reason basically is you've got to break the law, ma'am, to be arrested and incarcerated for anything. And merely because a group of men, even though their means and purposes might be illegal, are meeting to discuss their illegal businesses, doesn't necessarily mean we can arrest them for anything.
Well, what were the subpoenas? Why?
The subpoenas to appear before a grand jury, ma'am, specially convened to investigate organized crime.
Oh. Okay.
Thank you. Back in a moment. Hawaii, here you come. Win your dream trip. Enter Habitant's Hawaiian Jubilee Sweepstakes. 6 glamorous 2-week trips to Hawaii with exciting stops in San Francisco and Las Vegas. 22nd prizes, famous Weber lifetime porcelain barbecues. 5,000 special bonus prizes to the first 5,000 contest entries. To enter, just send labels or facsimiles from your favorite Habitant soups. Full details, Habitant Hawaiian Jubilee Sweepstakes in newspapers and at your favorite market. All right, let's continue with the calls and comments for Donald Kahn and Gary Ls Pierre. We have 5 minutes before news time, so let's hear from you. Hello.
Hello, Jerry?
Yes.
May I speak to Donald Kahn, please?
Ready.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Kahn, to think that the police and the law enforcement isn't on the take is a little ridiculous. Because I don't really believe that the Cosa Nostra could operate unless they had them on their side. And I'm not talking about legislatures. I'm talking about sergeants and captains and what have you.
You like my comment on that statement? Okay. I will not say at any time or at any place or anywhere that there aren't people in law enforcement who do not perform their duty and that there aren't people in law enforcement.
But you see, you're minimizing this.
You better believe I am, because I'll tell you why. I've spent 6 years of my life in this business, sir, and I've met all kinds of police officers. I've met the command-level police officer.
Yeah.
I've met the patrolmen. I've met the sergeants. I've dealt with them. They're friends of mine. And I'll tell you clearly that the business and the myth of the public that the average police officer is on the take is pure hokum. The Cosa Nostra doesn't have to operate that way, and they don't operate that way. I'm not saying it isn't happen, it does. But it's nowhere near as widespread as the general public thinks it is.
Mr. Kahn, I honestly feel that either you're naive or you just don't want to admit this.
Well,
Because can I just say this to you? It would take a small area where bookmaking is going on and there's a police station there. Don't you think that police department knows what's happening?
Let me ask you this question. How many times that police department has gone out and arrested a bookmaker,
How many times
brought him to court, and lost the case once he gets to court? Were you aware of the fact, for example, that up until last year in this Commonwealth, because of a quirk in our law, that a police officer could watch a bookie booking on the street, and he could not arrest him because that is not an arrestable offense?
Well, what happened previous to that?
All right, now that's for 40, 50, 60, ad infinitum, as many years as you want to name. A cop on the beat could see a man booking in front of him, and he could not arrest him because of a quirk in our law, and it took us 8 years to get an amendment of that particular ridiculous provision through the great and general court.
Well, Mr. Kahn, be realistic. If they wanted to stop the Cosa Nostra, if you really wanted to do it, you could do it. How do you do it to start with? Stop printing the number in the paper.
I buy that 100%. I've been saying the same thing.
What are you selling Armstrongs in cigar stores for? What are you giving out-of-state results in the newspaper, the Boston Globe, the American? Are these people controlled by the Cosa Nostra?
Now, wait a minute. Now, first of all, as far as publishing is concerned, sir, we're not going to advocate any system of censorship.
Well, I'm sure that the Boston Globe would like to clear up the Cosa Nostra.
As far as publishing the number in the paper, I agree with you 100% that it should be stopped. But as far as publishing race results and Armstrongs...
But who really cares about race results, what's happening in Miami?
I have no idea.
The person that's booking.
I don't personally care about them, but there are people who are entitled to buy those publications, sir, and they're not necessarily part of the Cosa Nostra.
And as far as loan sharking goes, you saw the person that that makes $80 a week. Be realistic. You'd have to reevaluate the whole thing and start giving credit to people that had bad credit. It isn't the guy that's making $80 a week. It's the guy that's got bad credit that can't get credit. Be realistic.
No, I'm not necessarily. Let's assume you've got a guy who's got a, has got a reasonably average job.
Yeah.
He gets heavy medical expenses, okay?
Yeah.
He goes to the bank, he doesn't own a car, he doesn't own his own home, and he owes medical expenses of, let's say, $1,000.
Right.
He asks the bank, will you give me money? They say no. He goes to the local finance company, and they say, no, you're already out on a loan for something else, for dentist work for your kid. No.
But 9 out of
Then
10
he turns to the loan shark.
It isn't that element of people that really borrow from
Sir,
loan sharks. I think you're wrong,
Sir,
Mr.
how many
Kahn.
people have you talked to who have borrowed from loan
Mr.
sharks?
Kahn,
I've talked
please
to a lot of
believe
them.
me. I know what I'm talking about. It's the person. It's the habitual gambler.
Well, there's no question. I would agree with you to this extent that some of the people who are into the sharks are the same people who are paying off gaming to establish
Who have
their line of
already
credit.
borrowed from...
But not the vast percentage of them, sir.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we've run into news time, and I appreciate your candidness with us. Thank you very much, too. It's 11 o'clock. Donald Kahn is here. Gary Ls Pierre is here. This is the aftermath of a most exciting and exclusive interview with John Fitzgerald. The title of that session tonight at 9:05 was A Price on His Head. And if you missed it, I'm sorry that you did, but this is the aftermath. And Donald Kahn, former Assistant Attorney General, and Gary Ls Pierre, who did that exciting interview, is with us tonight. And if you'd like to quiz, offer a comment, an opinion, a point of view, fine. 254-5678, back in 5. The Spirit of New England. WBZ and WBZ FM, Group W Westinghouse Broadcasting in Boston.
It's 28 degrees in Boston. Tonight's low will be in the teens. I'm Streeter Stewart reporting the 11 o'clock WBZ News for the new Purity Supreme supermarkets, where hundreds and hundreds of their everyday prices are lower than the competition, so your total weekly food bill will be less. Shop Purity Supreme, the anti-inflationary supermarket. 9 persons have perished in a tenement fire in a 5-story brick frame building in Jersey City, and it's feared that the death toll may rise since all of the residents have not yet been accounted for. One of the victims was a woman who leaped from the 5th floor with her 6-year-old daughter in her arms. She was killed and her daughter critically injured. Patricia Walsh and Marianne Wysocki of Rhode Island had been shot to death and slashed with a knife before they were dismembered and buried in the sand dunes of the Cape Cod National Seashore Park in Truro. That's the finding of an autopsy report issued tonight. A mammoth search will get underway in the area in the morning, and District Attorney Edmund Denise says, I expect more bodies to be found. Rescuers have decided to bore through solid rock in an attempt to reach William Jones, a 61-year-old miner who is trapped in a Utah mountain mine near Lark. Jones has been trapped for the past 5 days, and rescuers fear a cave-in if they try to enter through any other route. Jones is being fed through a 40-foot-long pipe. The Democratic leadership of the Massachusetts legislature has hired William Waldron, former Administration and Finance Commissioner, to take a long, hard look at the Volpe-Sargent government reorganization plan. Speaker of the House David Bartley said tonight,
only 2 specific details of the forthcoming Volpe-Sargent reorganization plan are known. First, according to the report, the plan will cost the state between $4 million and $7 million in new expenses each year. And secondly, according to the report, the plan will provide for the creation of 605 new jobs in the executive branch of government headed by Governor Sargent. Governors Volpe and Sargent have promised the plan will produce substantial savings to taxpayers in the long run.
Bartley says the Democrats just want to make sure the taxpayers really do get $1's worth of service for $1's taxes. Sirhan Sirhan testified today that when he left home the day Senator Robert Kennedy was shot, he was looking for a parade to celebrate the Israeli victory in the 6-day Arab-Israeli War. The parade was not scheduled until the following day. When he could not find the parade, he went to the Ambassador Hotel for a drink and had 2 or 3. And when he discovered that he was too drunk to drive home, he said he went back into the hotel to get some coffee to sober up. He says that's the last he remembers until he was being choked. Later, he says, he was told at the police station that he had shot Senator Kennedy. WBZ News Time, 3.5 minutes after 11.
Ever since we inaugurated our anti-inflationary price policy at Purity Supreme, we've noticed signs of increasing unrest among our customers. We think the cause of this is not knowing just what to do with the money they save when they shop at Purity Supreme. We've found this leftover money problem can be particularly frustrating to people who've been accustomed to shopping elsewhere. Now, far be it from Purity Supreme to cause mass anxiety and neurosis. We realize we have a responsibility to our public. So, in the interest of preserving the emotional stability and well-being of our customers, old and new, we've come up with a list of 22 things to do with the money you save at Purity Supreme. You'll find it published in your local newspapers. If you would like to contribute to this group therapy, let us know how you solved your leftover money hang-up. Simply write, Hang Up, care of Purity Supreme, the anti-inflationary supermarket.